I'm Kaylee, and today I'm recommending some fiction that you could read for the June Journeys with Inklings Readathon. In June, we'll be having the Inklings Readathon, and all you have to do to participate is just read one thing from the Inklings. But we also have an entire hero's journey that you could go on, and each stage of the journey, you can fulfill some of these reading prompts to complete the quests on your epic hero's journey. So the third stop on our epic hero's journey is to read some fiction from the Inklings. This could be an entire book, or it could just be a novella or a short story. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up if you're excited for the June Readathon. And follow me over on Goodreads and Storygraph and Instagram and all the places. If you want to print out this map, you can follow the link in the description and you can print this out. And there's also a smaller bookmark version. So we're going to start out with some fiction from C.S. Lewis. The obvious place to start is with the Chronicles of Narnia. If you haven't already read the Chronicles of Narnia, you need to start now. I know it looks humongous, but that's just because this is the whole series altogether. It's actually 7 books. If you've never read Chronicles of Narnia, I definitely recommend not reading it in chronological order. I would start with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which was the first one that was published. I feel like publication order is a much better way to experience this series, and I feel very strongly about that. So if you have not read Chronicles of Narnia, definitely start with Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Unfortunately, this edition is in chronological order, and that always bothers me. I don't like it. I have been reading and rereading the Chronicles of Narnia over and over since I was like 10 or 11, I think. I reread it every few years, and every time I just love it more and more. Once you've read all of the Chronicles of Narnia, the next place to start is with the sci-fi trilogy. So the space trilogy starts with Out of the Silent Planet, which in my opinion is the best book in this trilogy. And then the second book is Perelandra, and it finishes with That Hideous Strength. So this is the story of Dr. Ransom, who is kidnapped and taken to another planet. There he escapes from his kidnappers and he's on the run and he meets some aliens. What's really amazing about this particular first book is just the wild and weird world building in this other planet. There are different types of aliens and different creatures, and they all kind of have their own different society, their own culture and language. And it's all like very weird and strange and wacky. But at the same time, there's like this kernel of familiarity. And of course, it's C.S. Lewis, so there are a lot of explorations of spiritual truths. And ultimately, Ransom goes on this inner spiritual journey. It's really short and it's absolutely amazing. You could just read Out of the Silent Planet as a standalone if you felt like you weren't ready for a whole big long trilogy. And then you could always go back and read the other books in the trilogy, at another time. Perelandra also works as a standalone, so you could just read the first 2 books if you wanted. So none of these ends on a cliffhanger or anything like that. So this would be a great one to start with for the readathon because it is pretty short and you don't have to commit to the whole trilogy if you don't want to. Then we have the Screwtape Letters. I have read this only once because it freaked me out. So the Screwtape Letters is these imaginary letters from one demon to another demon teaching him how to tempt a human. So it's kind of like the playbook of the enemy, as it were. But it definitely gives you an insight into how just these little decisions that we make can actually have a big impact on our life. So it's definitely very interesting and makes you think about your spiritual journey and spiritual warfare in a new light. And of course, there's some clever humor in there as well, so that it doesn't feel quite so dark. Now, if you've already read a lot from C.S. Lewis and you feel like you want to branch out a little bit more, I do sort of recommend Till We Have Faces. The last time I read that, I was a teenager, and I feel like I just didn't really have the spiritual maturity to quite understand what was going on. Because there's like the main story of Psyche and Cupid and her sister. But then underneath that, there's like this double meaning underneath everything that's going on. So this story is told from the perspective of Psyche's embittered, mean old sister. She convinces Psyche not to trust Cupid. And there's this whole exploration of like the moral implications of not trusting the gods, as it were. So you can't really approach it as a story. It's more of an allegory and an exploration of different spiritual truths. It's one of those books that definitely makes you think, but it is kind of heavy reading. So I don't know that I would recommend it for everybody. Then we have Pilgrim's Regress. You definitely need to have already read Pilgrim's Progress, or at least be somewhat familiar with John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress before you read Pilgrim's Regress. So this is told in the same type of allegorical style as Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, but the obstacles that the pilgrim faces are kind of like more modern concepts than you would see from Bunyan. And it's kind of interesting to see how the pilgrim's journey reflects a lot of what Lewis says was kind of his own personal spiritual journey as he began to find his faith in Christ. This is another one that's very heavy with spiritual meanings, but well worth the read. Then we have Lewis's The Great Divorce. So The Great Divorce refers to a big divide between heaven and hell. This is told in a style that's kind of like an old-fashioned fable almost. This is about people who are in purgatory or in hell, and they catch a bus ride to heaven, and they're told they can stay in heaven if they want to. But most of them choose to get back on the bus and go back to hell. They choose this because their evil is familiar. Their misery, they're choosing misery because it's comfortable. They would rather be miserable than choose to change and embrace glory. Of course, there are a few people who choose what is good and choose to go to heaven, but there's a reason why they say that the doors of hell are locked from the inside. This is a really interesting exploration of the nature of grace and judgment and the consequences of our own choices. This one is also famous for having a little cameo of George MacDonald in heaven. C.S. Lewis absolutely loved George MacDonald's writing, and so I think it's kind of fun that he made George MacDonald be a character in this little fable. Next, we'll get into some J.R.R. Tolkien. So obviously the best place to start is with The Hobbit. This is just such a delightful fantasy story. I feel like I don't really need to say much about this one because everybody knows about The Hobbit and how wonderful it is. I reread The Hobbit every 2 or 3 years or so, and I just love it more and more every time. One of the things I love about it so much is how Bilbo really grows up during his adventures. He gets stronger and smarter and wiser and more mature. It's just the perfect hero's journey. And that's what June Journeys with Inklings is all about. And once you finish The Hobbit, of course you have to read The Lord of the Rings. I am sorry about this movie tie-in edition, but my other editions of Lord of the Rings are just too heavy to be holding up, so I just picked this floppy paperback to hold up. And you can see all my little markings in there. I find that people are kind of torn in whether or not they like Lord of the Rings. You either super, super love it, or you feel like it kind of drags out too long, or the journey is too boring or something. I think a lot of people get bogged down towards the latter end of Fellowship of the Ring when it's just like, okay, they're traveling and they're traveling and they're traveling, and can we get somewhere, please? But I've never found that myself. I hear a lot of people complain about that, but I always thought it was fascinating. I never felt like it was too slow-paced. I just adore everything about this trilogy. I could go on and on all day about how much I love Lord of the Rings. I first discovered Lord of the Rings when I was in college, and I read it during the summer, and I literally read it all in 3 days. I did nothing but eat and sleep and read. I was absolutely fascinated. And every time that I reread it, I'm just fascinated all over again. Even though I've read it so many times now that it's just become very familiar, I find that I still have that same fascination and enchantment and enjoyment of this book like I did the first time. Now, if you've read The Hobbit and you've read Lord of the Rings and you feel like, oh, I just love Middle-earth, can't get enough Middle-earth, then you might want to pick up the Silmarillion. This is very, very different from either The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings. So if you think of, The Hobbit was written for children, and then Lord of the Rings was a more grown-up version of this epic fantasy. Well, then the Silmarillion is like the scholars' version of Middle-earth. This reads like a history book. It can be a little bit dry at times. However, if you're obsessed with Middle-earth and you just love it, then I do recommend reading the Silmarillion. I've read it twice and really enjoyed it, but you have to be like in this kind of history buff sort of mood. The writing style is like very high church, is what I think of. It's very high fantasy kind of feeling. So this is like a prequel to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and it talks about all the history of Middle-earth up to the point of The Lord of the Rings. It almost kind of reads more like nonfiction because there's very little dialogue. It's more just, descriptions of what people did and where they went and the wars that started and things like that. So it doesn't read like a fiction story. It reads more like a history textbook or something. It's still really enjoyable though. There is some dialogue, obviously. It can just get a little dry at times. So if you read the Silmarillion, there is a chapter about the Children of Hurin, but then it was also published in more of a storytelling format as the Children of Hurin separately. You do get some of the story of the Children of Hurin in the Silmarillion, but then this is a little bit more of a fleshed out kind of story with you get more of the story arc of these characters, and you get more dialogue and everything, some more of the details. However, this is really, really sad. The Children of Hurin is just super, super tragic. So if you decide to read this one, make sure you have some tissues handy because you will be crying. If you're looking for something a little more fun and short, you could read Smith of Wooton Major or Farmer Giles of Ham. They are typically published together. These are two short stories, little fairy tales. Both of these are really, really fun, very imaginative and kind of silly at times, very playful. And you get all of that great adventure that you would think of for a traditional fairy tale. I definitely recommend these for the readathon. If you feel like I want to read something from Tolkien, but I just can't read all of the Lord of the Rings in June, well, you could read a little short story and have some fun. Also, keep in mind, if you want to read something that's really lengthy for the readathon, like if you want to read Lord of the Rings, you could just read Fellowship of the Ring for the readathon, and then continue reading and do Two Towers in July, and then finish up with Return of the King in August. Like your reading, if you decide to read something quite lengthy, does not have to be just confined to June. You can expand the readathon so you can finish your reading, at other times throughout the year. It's just that we're going to get started in June. And then you can expand your reading as much as you want to. If you feel like, I've already read everything from Tolkien, there's just nothing left. I've already read all that Tolkien ever wrote. You might want to look up the Father Christmas letters, which are these adorable letters that Tolkien wrote for his children as if they were from Father Christmas, telling all about Father Christmas's adventures in the North Pole. And it became a tradition where he would write a letter for his kids every Christmas. So those are really adorable, and they come with Tolkien's original illustrations. So cute. And another story that he wrote for his children is Roverandom, which is about this little dog that has all these ridiculous adventures, and it's very silly. Another short story by Tolkien is Leaf by Niggle, and it's here in this edition of the Tolkien Reader. So this is a story about an artist who is painting a tree, but he keeps perfecting just this one leaf. But because he has spent so much time on that one leaf, it has some consequences in his real life. He's gotten so obsessed with his art. So it's a really interesting little short story, kind of exploring the nature of creativity and art in our lives. And those are all the fiction books that I would recommend for the June Journeys with Inklings Readathon. Please leave a comment and let us know, what are you planning to read for fiction for the readathon, and what are some fiction books that you would recommend for this readathon? Did I miss any that you feel like, hey, she didn't talk about this a book? Maybe I missed one somewhere, or I missed a short story or a small novella or something. Let us know in the comments what is one of your favorites. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and remember, the right book in the right hands at the right time can change the world.